Good evening. My name's Dr. Mike Masding. I'm co-chair of the UKFPO, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on the pre-allocation process for people applying for UKFP 2024, i.e. foundation programs that will start in August 2024. Next slide, please. On the panel this evening, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tom Yap, who's our Special Advisor at the UKFPO for Recruitment, and Professor Kate Thomas, who is Dean of Birmingham Medical School and the Programme Director of the MBCHB programme there. Tom and Kate will be contributing throughout the next hour as we talk about the pre-allocation process. It's worth saying at this point that we asked you to send in questions, and we're very grateful for those. Some of them were related to matters outside the pre-allocation process, and we have another webinar about the changes made to the allocation process to the foundation programme through a preference-informed allocation. That's next Wednesday, September the 13th, again at 6 o'clock. British Summer Time, so you're very welcome to attend that, but we won't be answering those questions this evening. A lot of the questions we received are covered in the guidance, and I would have to say that attendance or observation of this webinar is no substitute for reading the guidance that's available on the UKFPO website, and I'm pleased to say that we have just published in the last hour the how to apply for the UK Foundation Programme guidance. It's all there somewhere. Please have a look through it, and there are specific guidance documents about pre-allocation. Some of the questions we've covered in the slides, but other questions we will cover towards the end of this webinar. The slides and the webinar recording will be available by the beginning of next week for you to look at again if you would like to, or to show to your friends and colleagues. So first of all, what is pre-allocation? Well, it's where applicants to the foundation programme are placed into a foundation school for specific reasons, which we'll come to in a minute. The aim of it is to support doctors who have specific needs during their foundation programme training. You will have noticed that I use the word need there, and it's really important to stress that pre-allocation is applicable if you absolutely must be in a particular geographical location. It's not just that you'd like to be. We know that some foundation schools are more popular than others, and because of that, we can't allocate every applicant to where they might necessarily want to be. This is very much about where an applicant must be in a foundation school because of specific needs. Every application is considered individually. There's no quota on pre-allocation, and the result for an individual's pre-allocation request is irrelevant to every other individual. And there are a small number that we consider due to exceptional circumstances. So every application will be considered by the panel, and my colleagues will explain in a minute about how that all works, but will be viewed on an individual basis as to the need for that applicant to be placed in a foundation school. Next slide, please. So as we've mentioned, the application to a particular foundation school, and it is only one foundation school that you can apply for in pre-allocation, is made on the main application form on the Oriel system. And likewise, the applications and the supporting evidence that you need to send, which again we'll talk about in a minute, is all submitted as part of the main foundation programme application on our Oriel. The slides will be available, and you can see here links to the guidance, the forms, and all our timelines is all available there. And I can only emphasize again the real importance of reading the guidance, and then probably just reading it again is really very important to make sure that you give yourself the best possible chance of having a successful pre-allocation application. Next slide, please. So I'll now ask Tom Yap, Dr. Tom Yap, to talk about the different criteria that we use for pre-allocation. Thanks, Tom.
Good evening, Noswifar. Welcome to the webinar. So I'm just going to go through the pre-allocation criteria and give a bit brief overview, but as Mike has already stressed, all the information is available on the UKFPO website, and it's important that you use that as your main resource when considering your application for pre-allocation. These criteria haven't changed in the last year or two, but the actual evidence required has been refined, relating to feedback we've had over the past 12 to 24 months. So number one is relatively straightforward: those with significant parental or guardian responsibilities for a child up to the age of 18. So I think you don't really need a great deal else, but to look at what evidence you may need and who you need to sign your form saying that they know you and the child. Two is split up into two categories: primary caring responsibility and significant caring responsibilities. They are similar, but for the first one, for 2A, you will need a supporting statement stating that you are a primary carer. Which actually is quite an undertaking for anybody alongside either studying medicine or practicing medicine. But again, refer to the guidance and you can see what is required there. Significant caring responsibilities was added a couple of years ago, and recognises that a number of you will have a significant caring responsibility and yet do not fulfil the primary carer role. I think it's important. One of the key areas to stress here is this extends beyond weekend care responsibility, and often you'll need to demonstrate a role either in the week or 7 days a week. 3, medical condition. Now, quite a lot has changed with the management of medical conditions in the post-COVID era, and the rise of virtual medicine maybe has had an impact on this area. Generally speaking, you have a condition that requires local follow-up. Mike and I are both practicing clinicians, and we see many people who move between areas and jobs, and their care is transferred between different clinical teams, and that isn't unusual. I think one of the big changes we've seen in this area in the last few years is that a need for outpatient follow-up on a 3, 6 or 12 monthly basis is not a requirement for pre-allocation to a foundation school. So again, read the guidance and see whether you fulfill these or not. 4 is unique, and now unique is quite difficult to classify because it actually covers anything and everything, and we're often asked to give examples of this. We can do that, but generally speaking, do not use unique circumstances if you feel that you don't quite meet the criteria in the other areas. So we often see people put down medical condition under unique circumstances because they know they don't meet the medical criterion. Unique must be unique. Examples can be having a modified housing for a disability that doesn't meet the medical condition, belonging to an elite sport or arts organisation that requires placement in a particular area. So lots of different things can be covered by unique. 5, again, is split into educational circumstances where between you and your medical school, there's a feeling that actually pre-allocation to a location would be beneficial on educational grounds. This is a relatively restricted group and limited to a small number in each medical school. And then the 5B is for those people who've entered into their medical training from a widening participation background and have received financial support. So we can go into these areas in more detail, but I think that we'd like to stress that the information is up on the website and we'd want you to all look at that and see where you fit in. The other key point with this is you need to determine which criterion you're going to apply under. You cannot apply under more than one, okay? And I think, again, good conversation with your medical school may help point you in the direction. Next slide. I don't know if this is me, Mike, or you.
Happy for you to explain, Tom.
Okay. So for pre-allocation, applications are on Oriel. You submit your application at the same time as you submit your foundation application form, with a closing date of 12 midday on the 4th of October. The Word application form to be completed is found on the UKFP website, and as Mike says, how to apply for pre-allocation has been uploaded to the website today. Evidence can be uploaded as onto Oriel. And examples of acceptable evidence are available in the pre-allocation guidance. As for proof of address, you must be able to provide evidence that you currently reside at that address. And this is one thing that sometimes people fall down in this area. It's the proof of address, and what we accept or what we don't accept. Again, there's a list on the website. As I said, you can only apply under one criterion. The circumstance must be relevant to the time of application. So if you need to be pre-allocated for a medical reason, because it applies now, not because you anticipate it applying in the future. And the same for all the criteria. If your circumstances change between your application and your allocation and subsequent starting of the foundation programme, there is the option to apply for an inter-foundation school transfer along the same criteria, but you cannot so for example, if you're pregnant but not yet a parent, you can't apply under parental, although you will, once you're a parent, be able to apply for an inter-foundation school transfer. And applicants cannot link the application with someone else if they're applying for pre-allocation. Next slide. So I'll carry on, and Mike can take the next slide. So this is just for pre-allocation to foundation school. OK, each foundation school then has its own way of managing a pre-allocated applicant to a programme. So again, you may want to discuss this with the relevant foundation school if you need to understand. We often get people saying, I need to be at this place within a foundation school, and that isn't what the panel will decide when agreeing to pre-allocation to school. It's just to school, and then each school will do a different way of doing it. So as it says, local process for pre-allocation to group and programme, and it's not guaranteed. I know how it works in Wales. Mike knows how it works in Wessex, having been the foundation school director there, and we have a good idea how it works elsewhere, but you will need to check. Your applications, as Mike said, are considered on a case-by-case basis by a national panel. We set aside quite a lot of time for this because the number of applications has increased considerably over the years. You are still able to apply for a specialised foundation programme or a foundation priority programme, but we would expect you to only be doing that if it is relevant to your need to be in a particular area. And certainly if you accept an SFP or an FPP, your pre-allocation won't apply to these posts because this is a separate process. And your requested foundation school must be ranked first in your preference list. Next slide. Mike?
Thanks. So just to really emphasize that our expectation is that if you're applying for SFP as well as pre-allocation, that we would expect them to be in the same place because by applying for pre-allocation, you are effectively telling us that you must be somewhere. Not it's just that you just want to be somewhere, you must be somewhere for a good reason. Nonetheless, we can't stop you applying for a specialised foundation programme elsewhere, but if you do accept that, you will then lose your pre-allocation. And so if you accept a specialised foundation programme, if you accept a foundation priority programme, your pre-allocation is then taken away, and you will be expected to take up the post of SFP or FPP. We need to make that really, really clear. A key change for 2024 for all of our processes is that we've taken away the stage 1 appeal process, and this is also the case for pre-allocation. So once you have pressed submit, then you will not be able to correct any errors on your application or in the evidence that you have sent. It's therefore really important to take some time to ensure that you filled in the form correctly and that all the supporting evidence that you've required for your application is provided on Oriel. And there will be no appeal process about an error in sending something or that you forgot to include something. It will only be an appeal about the process of the pre-allocation panels. So the key thing to remember is that please check your application and then recheck it and then recheck it to make sure that you have got everything that you need, because once you've pressed the submit button on Oriel, there will be no time to correct any errors that you've made. And this is consistent throughout all of our processes now, and indeed I suspect in lots of other aspects of life too. What we've discussed following feedback from our stakeholders about the widening participation criteria 5B, and this has been updated this year to clarify that financial support doesn't include the NHS bursary, but rather specific financial support as part of you being accepted into medical school as part of a widening access programme. Next slide, please. So we will now go through some questions, and I'll ask Tom and Professor Kate Thomas, Dean of the Birmingham Medical School, to answer questions that have been sent in. We have categorised them, so hopefully most of the main issues will be covered, but if not, I would emphasise go and read the guidance that's available on the UKFPO website, or indeed ask at your medical school. If you're an overseas medical school applicant, then ask the UKFPO. So I'm going to start off with a question for Tom. If I am rejected from one criteria, can I apply via another? In other words, if I'm rejected from criterion 2, can I then apply through criterion 4? Tom.
So the simple answer, Mike, is no. Obviously, you would apply for under one criterion only anyway, and there isn't a second phase to pre-allocation applications. I think I would just stress that if you have any doubt about this, you should be discussing it with the relevant people within your medical school, and if they have any doubt, they usually have a discussion with their local foundation school to try and find the best fit for you in terms of the pre-allocation process. So simple answer is no, but always explore with others what might be the best or the most appropriate criterion to use.
Thank you, Tom. A question now for Kate. In terms of the form being filled in, does the medical school have to complete the form?
So the student needs to complete the form, the initial parts, and then there is a section for someone else to complete. Often this is the medical school, but I think that you need to be aware that it's the responsibility of the applicant to be absolutely sure that everything is completed accurately. The medical school will make sure that their section is completed accurately, but the applicant needs to be absolutely sure that they have done that. I think that certainly from some conversations that I've had with students at Birmingham, there is a concern that the medical school might not be supportive, and I think what applicants need to be aware of is that we've got to follow the guidance, because if we don't follow the guidance, then your application will be unsuccessful. So sometimes that does mean saying you don't meet the criterion that you're applying for, and we can't therefore support you. It's not a personal slight on your character. It's just that we've got to be absolutely sure that we follow what the guidance says in the same way that you have. And I think in terms of contacting your medical school to have discussions with them, I would do that in the usual way that you would contact someone. There should be a lead for UKFPO who you know who that is, so you can either contact them or go via your administrator for your final year if you're not sure who the UKFPO lead is. Medical schools are aware of the guidance. They will have read it. They will have experience of applications from previous years. They will know what the changes are. So they should be able to help you. And as Mike said, or it may have been Tom actually, I beg your pardon, I'm not muddling you up. I do know the difference between you. But we have good relationships with our local foundation school. So if we're not sure, then we can ask our foundation school director what they think would be the right course of action and get advice that way. So don't be afraid to ask your medical school for advice. If we aren't sure for any reason, then we can get further information.
Thanks, Kate. A fantastic answer, which the UKFPO absolutely agrees with every word there. It's really important, as Kate said, we have. So Kate, Tom and I have known each other for many years. We've worked together for many years. This is a process that has gone on for many years. It won't be something that's completely strange to your medical school. It's also worth saying that the UKFPO have agreed these pre-allocation criteria over a number of years as they've evolved with our stakeholders, and probably the very most important stakeholders, I think, are the Medical Schools Council and the BMA Medical Students Committee, and we have agreed these with those bodies. So it's not just something that purely comes from the UKFPO, it is something that comes with all the medical schools approval, and likewise the British Medical Association as well. So thanks, Kate, a really excellent and comprehensive answer to that question. The next question is for Tom. Can I be pre-allocated to a foundation school I'm not currently located in?
So, I mean, if you consider that your circumstance should be applicable now, it's difficult to imagine that you need to be somewhere for your foundation programme when you've been undertaking your medical studies somewhere else in the UK. There are circumstances when it can happen, but so generally speaking, we would expect you to be pre-allocated to the foundation school that your medical school is linked with, because by definition, if you've been a primary carer for somebody, either you've been commuting a significant distance to be a carer, or from the carer, the person being cared for's home to medical school, or you live in that area. So there are circumstances when you can be pre-allocated to a foundation school remote to your undergraduate training, and I can think of unique criterion 4. It's possible that you may be then training with an elite sport based in an area which is away from your undergraduate training. 5B is another one. There may be, from a widening participation background requiring financial support, that you may be returning to a family home away from where you've undertaken your medical studies. So the simple answer is you can be, but normally speaking, because of your circumstances requiring pre-allocation, we expect that they probably apply to where you currently are now. So unless you've been doing a lot of commuting one way or another, either to your course or back to undertake whatever criterion you'll fulfill, it's difficult to imagine that it would be anything other than your local foundation school.
Thank you, Tom. Another commonly asked question, both over the years and indeed this time, is what evidence can I use as proof of address?
So there are many examples of acceptable evidence in the pre-allocation guide, and I won't list them. I think suffice to say there are some to avoid, but generally speaking, if you have utility bills, and I know lots of this has moved to an electronic format, and it can sometimes be a bit more challenging, but most people will have one or more of the acceptable evidence which is listed on the UKFPO website.
And again, we can only emphasise, please go to the guidance. It is there on the UKFPO website, and look at that. And there's a comprehensive list, although not totally exhaustive, of the types of things that are acceptable as proof of address. And as Kate said, if you're not absolutely sure, then please ask for help. But we must emphasize that there is, once you've pressed submit with the evidence that you've sent in, that is what will be viewed by the panel on an individual basis. And if it's not the correct evidence, then the application for pre-allocation will not be upheld. Of course, it is worth saying, we haven't mentioned this as yet, that if your application for pre-allocation is not accepted, you will still be in the normal foundation programme allocation. So you will get a foundation programme post. It just may not be exactly in the geography that you want. And we'll cover a bit more about this in the webinar on Wednesday the 13th next week, about the preference informed allocation. Kate, the next question is for you. Can the forms be handwritten, or do they have to be typed and have an electronic signature?
They can be handwritten or typed. You can do either. I mean, obviously, if you're going to handwrite or you're going to get someone else to handwrite, you do have to be absolutely sure that it's legible, because the panel, you know, it's a bit like in the days when you wrote in an exam. I don't know about your exams, but certainly ours are all online now, so everyone types, which has made a huge difference to the ability of the examiner to be able to understand what you're saying. But you do need to be sure that it's legible, because the panel have only got that. They're not going to contact you to say, oh, I can't quite read this bit. And so you need to be sure that if you handwrite or someone else handwrites, that it can be read easily.
Thank you. Next question for you too, Kate. I was accepted into med school through a gateway widening participation route, but actually ended up in a different medical school. Can I use the acceptance from the widening participation entry as proof for pre-allocation?
No, it does need to be the medical school that you have gone to that accepted you under a WP or gateway scheme. So it's important that people know that. It won't apply to a huge number of people, but it's important that those of you for whom it does apply realise that that means that you can't apply under that criterion.
Thank you. And you know, we have to have criteria so that we can make as objective a decision as possible on someone's pre-allocation application. It can be difficult around the edges, and there will be some people who may feel that some of these processes are slightly unfair, but we do have to have criteria, otherwise we will end up with you know, everyone being pre-allocated, which means no one's pre-allocated. So we really, there may be some circumstances in small numbers that don't quite fit the criteria, and we do continue to review the criteria on an annual basis to ensure that they're as fit for purpose as they possibly can be. Tom, next question for you. Is there a difference in applying as a primary carer or as a significant carer with regards to being allocated to the preferred foundation school?
Simple answer is yes and no, Mike. I think, if you read the definition of primary carer, it's actually it's very difficult to do alongside almost anything else, because you are by definition the primary carer for somebody. So I think if you do meet the criteria for a primary carer role, it's highly likely that you are living and studying in a very similar location, whereas a significant carer may well be living slightly further away, and therefore I think it's more likely that you could be allocated to a foundation school other than your local foundation school with a significant carer role. I think as a primary carer, if you're listed as a primary carer, you're essentially doing that now, and to do that in another location whilst undertaking your medical degree, I think would be very difficult. So I think it's yes and no, with it more likely that the significant carer could be applying for a foundation school remote to their medical school location.
And as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, the underpinning principle of pre-allocation is to support foundation program doctors in getting through their foundation program. There are no reductions in curricular requirements if you're pre-allocated, or if you work less than full time, or this or that. All foundation doctors have to achieve all of the curricular outcomes during their foundation program training. And I'm pleased to say, because of the quality of the training, the vast majority, 99%, do achieve those curricular outcomes. But the aim of pre-allocation is to help those who need it to be able to concentrate on their foundation program training to achieve those curricular outcomes. So you need to be really, really clear in your thinking when you're making these applications, is how will pre-allocation help me whilst I'm being a doctor? Because you'll still have to do everything that we would expect of an F1 doctor during that time. It may be over a slightly prolonged time if you work less than full time. There may be some reasonable adjustments to be made if you have a health condition, but nonetheless you still need to reach all the curricular outcomes. So it's really important to think about these criteria and how they could help you to get through your foundation program, and therefore there is an absolute must for you to be in a particular location, as opposed to it just be something that would be quite nice for you. Okay, the next question is for Kate. In terms of the educational circumstances, criterion 5A, what happens if there are more than 5 students from one medical school that want to apply for pre-allocation under that criterion?
The medical school will have to make a decision as to which 5 they will support. So that's a difficult situation for everyone, because obviously if you meet that criterion, it will be a question of the medical school making a judgment as to which 5 most need that pre-allocation. And again, we go back to the fact that this is about what you need rather than what you would like to have. And I think the key thing there is to talk to your medical school so that they fully understand your circumstances and why you're asking for pre-allocation, so that it's not just, oh, it looks as if I fit that criterion, I'll go for it. But actually there is a reason that you want to stay local to the medical school normally, or in very rare circumstances that you wish to go to your hometown, which is possible, but you would have to have a very convincing reason for doing that. So it is something that you need to talk to your medical school about, so that they really do understand in full your reasoning, And then I'm afraid it will come down to the judgment of the medical school, because we are only allowed 5 nominations in that criterion.
Thanks, Kate. Tom, a question here about the dates for the process of pre-allocation and when people will be told the results, etc. Could you comment on that?
Yes, well, the stock answer, Mike, as you know, is to always consult the UKFPO website for the latest information, including the timeline. But I think the key point is that pre-allocation has to be submitted at the same time as your application to the foundation programme, and the closing date and time for that is October the 4th at 12 midday. Late applications for either will not be accepted or considered, and with all the process, I believe that applicants who apply for pre-allocation will be informed of their success or otherwise by the end of November. But as with all things, it's best to rely on the information published on our website.
Thanks, Tom. And I'd like to, on behalf of the UKFPO, just really re-emphasise or even just repeat this, and we will be repeating it in the webinar, I'm sure, next week. The closing date for applications is October the 4th at midday. Any application that is after that time and date will not be considered at all. There are no exceptions to that. We every year we receive anguished contacts, emails, letters, phone calls from people who say my application was late. I'm sorry if that's the case, but it will not be considered, and there are no exceptions to that. Our advice to you is take your time to do your application. Make sure you've got everything right. Make sure you've got all the evidence you need if you're applying for pre-allocation, but do it sometime before October the 4th at 11:59 a.m. To make sure that your application is submitted and that it has gone through properly, and that there will be no IT issues or anything else like that stops your application from going through. So if I were you, I would not leave it until 1:12 on October the 4th. I would do it before then to make sure that the application gets through. The next question for Kate. Applicants who are in a committed relationship and live with their partner, can they apply to be pre-allocated to the area that they currently live in?
I'm afraid not. There isn't a criterion for this in the 5 criteria that there are, and so even if you are married or in a civil partnership or in a committed relationship of any other sort, that is not a reason for pre-allocation. You can only apply under the criteria as laid out in the guidance. So I'm afraid that one's a no.
Thanks, Kate. And again, I would emphasise that these criteria have been debated and agreed with our stakeholders at the medical schools and the BMA Medical School Student Committee too. Tom, a question about applying. What should I include in the supporting statement for the widening participation criterion 5B?
It's up to you, but it's important you try and give the panel something to consider under this criterion. I think it's possible you don't submit anything, but it then makes it difficult for the panel to consider whether that meets the requirements of pre-allocation. So in this, we usually ask you to provide some evidence, some background to the entry under widening participation and the financial support. Within reason, we don't need there is a limit to how much detail you can actually give, a limit on the words, like word count, I believe. But yeah, no, it's enough that will allow the panel to consider your application under this criterion 5B.
And remember that, as we've mentioned a number of times, every application will be considered, but on an individual basis. So you need to give the panel sufficient information to be able to make a decision as to whether the criterion is fitted. So, Tom, even if it was left completely blank, the supporting statement for 5B, would that mean that the application was rejected, or it would still be considered?
No, Mike, it would still be considered, but obviously there's less for the panel to work on. So, you know, it's not a blanket no, but it will be a difficult yes, probably, when you need something to consider.
Thanks, Tom. A question for Kate. I'm away from the family home when I'm at medical school, and so don't have proof of address of the family home. What sort of things could be used under those circumstances?
So you do need to be able to demonstrate proof of address. So the full list is on the UKFPO website in the pre-allocation guidance. It's towards the end of the guidance. You can use a driver's license, you can use a utility bill, but it does need to prove that this is your family home. So it's not enough to have a utility bill in someone else's name, say, but the full guidance is there, and I think it's very clear about what is and isn't acceptable. So a mobile telephone bill, for example, is not acceptable, but a landline telephone bill is. And as Tom has said, it is slightly more complicated in these days of electronic billing, but it is possible to prove that. So my advice in this circumstance would be read the guidance. If you don't fulfill any of the proof of address, if you don't have any of those in your family home name, then that probably means that you aren't going to be able to apply to be allocated to that area in whichever criterion you're thinking of.
Thank you, Kate. So those are the main categories of questions that people sent in. And again, I'd like to say thank you to those of you who did take the time to send in a question. Other questions were answered in the slides, and I think it's fair to say that the answer to virtually all of the questions is available in the guidance. I'd like to really emphasize that this is a process that we've been doing for a number of years, and there will be expertise at your medical school. If you're an international medical graduate at a non-UK medical school, there will be you'll be able to contact the UKFPO. So if you're unsure, please go to your medical school. They will have good contacts with the local foundation school who will also be able to help. If you're an international medical graduate from outside the UK, then please contact the UKFPO if you're not sure. I'd like to really emphasize that there is no stage 1 appeals, so you must get your application absolutely right before you press the submit. So check it again, and then check it again. And as we mentioned at the start, watching this webinar, I hope it's been interesting and informative, but it's no substitute for reading the guidance, which is now available on the UKFPO website. So I'd like to finish by particularly thanking Kate and Tom for giving up their time for this webinar. I'd like to thank the UKFPO team who've organised it so ably and kept it going. And I'd like to wish you all the best. If you are applying for pre-allocation, good luck with your application. I may well see you again this time next week when we'll talk about the preference informed allocation. But between now and then, take care of yourselves. Bye.